Okay, so this PowerPoint is going to cover part of Chapter 2 of Fundamentals of English Grammar. I'm not going to cover the whole chapter as it was covered in ESL 31, but I'm just going to highlight three tables which I want to focus on, which I think are important here. There are other things in this chapter which you should know, but the expectation is that you've already studied this. But particularly, I'd point you to page 32, which has a list of irregular verbs. That's a helpful resource for you to refer back to. One thing I recommend that you do while you're watching this video is if you have your book open, you can open up to page 42, which is where I'm going to be starting. The other thing that I recommend that you do is that you print out the practice quiz for chapter 2, because on that practice quiz there's three essential questions which you need to be able to answer, and I think that it'll be useful for you. Okay, also in this video I will be answering the questions that I'm asking you to provide the answer for. So this table here is talking about the simple past and the past progressive. And the first question that I ask you is, what's the difference between the two of them? Well, just like when we said the simple past and the simple present and the present progressive, one thing we said was different about them was the way that they looked. So in this case, we say he ran to work yesterday. Ran is the simple past, and it's just one word. But in the second one, we say he was running when the bus drove by. Was running is the past progressive, and it's two words. So that's one very obvious difference, but we want to focus more on the use. So let's look at the use here of the simple past. Here we have two examples. We say Edgar ran to work yesterday and Pat drove to work this morning. Now on that axis, we see the X, and the X represents the simple past. What that means is that it's some event that began and ended at a particular time in the past. So when we use the simple past, we're describing something that happened at some specific time and that is now no longer true, or not no longer true, but is no longer going on. The past progressive is different. One thing you'll notice here is that we have two X's on here. So here's the examples. We have Edgar was running when the bus drove by, and they were eating when I got home. So what we mean with the past progressive is we're saying that something was in progress. And oftentimes we say that something was in progress when something else occurred. So if we look at those two X's, the first one is representing the ing, the first one that has the line after it, the first X. The second one is representing the simple past tense. So in the first example, Edgar was running when the bus drove by. The first X is the running. The second X is the drove, the bus drove. Similarly, in D, the first X would be were eating, and the second X would be got. One of the words that we'll often see with sentences where you have a combination of the simple past and the past progressive is when and while. Now, what when means, which you probably already know, but means at that specific time. So we've already said that the simple past is used at that specific time. So when we have when, we use the simple past. So when the bus drove by. And then we say Edgar was running, being the second portion of the sentence, because they were happening at the same time. So the when represents the second X. So the bus drove by while Edgar was running. This means the exact same thing, but while is focusing on during that time. So while is describing the past progressive. So while represents the first of the two X's. So here's the different formations of statements and negatives. Okay, and just like we have in all of our statements and negatives, with the structure for a statement would be subject, verb, complement. In this case, we have a helping verb, which is was or were. So we have subject plus helping verb plus complement. In the second example, we have two ways of making the negative. One way is we can have the subject plus the helping verb plus the negative plus the verb plus the complement. So we say, I was not talking. Or I could also say the subject plus the helping verb with a contraction plus a verb plus a complement. So you weren't talking. Okay, both of them are correct. And then in terms of question formation, we take the helping verb. The helping verb is always going to be at the beginning of the question, unless there is a question word. And then we have the subject plus the verb. So the helping verb is was, the subject I, and the verb is talking. In this case, we don't have a complement. All right. So all of these examples are asking you to use the progressive tense. So yesterday, the camels were walking. Here at 8 o'clock, we began to work. At 8:30, we were working. Okay. Um, Marie uh, was waiting for the bus. Marie wasn't waiting for a plane. Okay, so this is just the use of those. So the important distinction that we want to make here is that the simple past tense is used for something that happened, began and ended in the past, whereas the past progressive is talking about an action that was in progress in the past, and oftentimes it's connected with another action that is in the simple past. Okay, so let's talk about time clauses. The second question asks you about using the past tense in time clauses. So here we say our son called while we were using the computer. And here's a bunch of different examples. After I exercised, I took a shower. I took a shower after I exercised. So the time clause is also often called, well, another name for it is a dependent clause. And if you've learned about complex sentences before, you should know that a complex sentence is made up of a main clause and a dependent clause. So in this case, we have the time clause or the dependent clause, which says after I exercised, and the main clause, which says I took the shower. Now you'll see that in A and B, it's the same words. They're just written in a different order. The thing that you should pay attention to is the comma. In A, when we have the time clause first, we use a comma. In B, when we have the time clause second, we don't use a comma. So here's a couple more examples. I took a shower after I exercised. Before I took a shower, I exercised. Now, we have all of these different time words: after, before, until, as soon as, while, when. But we put them before a subject and a verb, and that's what we create. That's how we create a time clause. So here, I exercised until I took a shower. As soon as I exercised, I took a shower. Okay? So what until means is up until that point, up to that point, and no longer. So I exercised until I took a shower, meaning I stopped exercising when I took a shower. Okay? As soon as means immediately after. As soon as I exercised, I took a shower. So that means immediately after that, I took a shower. Here we have while and when. But the important thing here is what I mentioned before, is that when the main clause comes first, we don't use a comma before the time clause. But when the time clause comes first, we do use a comma before the main clause. Okay, so here we have, let's look at the verbs here. I say, when I rang the doorbell, it played music. Now, when uh, allows the simple past in both clauses, the time clause and the main clause. So when I rang the bell, it played music. Okay, so both of these are in the past tense, but the meaning is different. When we have a time clause with when, the time clause with when represents the first activity. So I rang the doorbell. That's the first thing that happened. The next thing that happens is it played music. Okay? So the time clause is what happened first with when, okay? And the main clause is what happened second. Okay? Again, this is when you're using when. So let's look at a different example. She was learning to ski while he was playing golf. Now, in this case, we have two actions that are both happening at the same time. Okay? And we have the time word while. So in this situation, we can use the past progressive in both clauses when we have while. We're not required to. I could write this same one as she learned to ski while he played golf, and the meaning is very, very similar. Okay? But we are allowed to use both the progressive in both of them when we're using while, because while means at the same time. Okay? So if we look at this one, we're going to have a couple of ways to answer this. But let's look at what it says. It says, while we were working, our children were attending school. Now we could also say, while we worked, our children attended school. And the meaning would be the same, because while has the meaning of at the same time. So what about this one? Lynn, okay? Now in this case, we need to say Lynn fell asleep, because we can see right there that she's already asleep. So remember, the past tense means that it began and ended in the past. Okay? To fall asleep, that's when, boom, lights out. Okay? So we can't say Lynn was falling asleep, because if we said she was falling asleep, it means she's still awake. But we can say while she was reading. Okay? So she was starting the reading, and then she fell asleep. Okay, so here we have an example where we have the first and the then. So after is different than when. After, well, in a sense, after is the same as when. But we're going to put after before the first event. So it's going to be after I went shopping, I put away the food. Or we could say, I put away the food after I went shopping. You'll notice the difference between the two of these is that when we have the time clause first, we use a comma. And when we have the time clause second, we don't use a comma. Okay? And so here's the last question, the last section that we want to cover. Okay? And this is about the use of used to. Now, the question asks you to answer is, what's the difference between used to and the simple past? Okay? The easy part is we already know about the simple past. The simple past is an event that began and ended in the past. Okay? The used to is different from that. So let's look at this. He used to be a baby, but now he's a man with a family. So here's another example. I used to swim every afternoon. Now I work in the afternoon. Fatima used to play piano, but now she plays the violin. Jasmine used to laugh, but she doesn't anymore. So what used to means a past habit, in this case a past situation, but oftentimes a past habit that was true in the past but is no longer true in the present. And it's formed by using used to plus the simple form of the verb. Okay? So even though this means the past tense, right? If I say I used to swam, that's wrong, because swim is the simple form of the verb. If I say Fatima used to played, that's wrong, because play is the simple form of the verb. Jasmine used to laugh is wrong because laugh is the simple form of the verb. So in terms of making questions, right, with used to, we have to use did for making questions. So did you used to swim every afternoon? Or we can also say, did you used to swim every afternoon? We can take that D off. Either way is correct. Okay? Both ways are correct. We can also do the same thing with negatives. I didn't used to swim every day, but now I swim every afternoon. Okay? And we can also say Fatima never used to love school, but now she loves it. Okay? So for negative ideas, it's more common to say never used to than didn't used to. But both of them are correct. Both of them are correct. So let's look at this one and see, is this one correct or incorrect? The children used to swim in the ocean. Well, it's incorrect because it needs to be the children used to swim in the ocean. Okay? It's a little bit confusing because it looks like they're swimming right now, right? And used to means not doing it anymore. Were you used to ask questions in school? Okay. All right. So, whoops. So this one is already telling us that it's not correct. And the problem with it is that it should be, did you used to ask questions in school? We have to use did, not were or was when we're having used to. All right, so this is the last slide. What I recommend that you do is go ahead and write down the answers to the questions for homework, and we will go over them, and we'll do some of the practice in class, some of the activities in the book in class. So be sure to bring your book to class. All right, take care. See you in class. Bye.